Welcome to Bring Me My Books, the podcast. My name is Christy Kane. I'm one of the hosts, and I am with our co-host, Travis Lowe. Travis, we've been talking in these last few episodes how we're doing all the episodes for Pentecost and culture making in your like neck of the woods.
Oh yeah.
And we're here for the Hope Words Writers Conference. But I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about this actual space where we are, because this is what we're up to right now.
Yeah.
And the man behind the space.
Yeah, I would love for people to see where we are. You get a little corner of the space here, but we're in Gary Bowling's House of Art. Gary's been a friend for years. And just a creative genius. I mean, he is a wild man. he is so cool. But they have this 6-story, humongous building
so big
that they've turned into a full, just living art installation. Just the wildest art. They mainly take things that would be thrown away, recycle it, and make it into beautiful things, which I think is kind of the picture of the Bible, taking broken things that would have been thrown away and finding a way to revive it and turn it into something beautiful. They do it here in this incredible building that's been around forever. It's been a cultural meeting place for decades. 7 presidents have been on the stage here. They're in like the Ripley's Believe It or Not or Guinness Book of World Records, because you can enter this building on ground level on 5 different stories.
Oh, I didn't know that. I missed that.
So it's built into a steep mountain, and the driveway just wraps around the building. And so as the driveway goes around, you're going up like 5 floors of the building, and there's doors on every level. So it's, I believe it's the only building like that you could find anywhere.
Yeah.
Such a cool space. It's so neat to be here. When we're talking about culture making, this book about creativity, we were saying it would be neat to get Gary in here and just say, man, teach us.
Yes.
Teach us about creating, and it's what he's given his life to. So it's really cool to be here. I'm so thankful they opened this space to us and made this possible.
Well, and in some of the ways, you told me, you said you have never seen anything like this, and you were right when you came in here. And it really is like you could walk around this place and you could find something new to look at. I mean, every every turn, like every glance, you could turn into something. But as we're talking about culture making and cultivating and the things where you are, he really has done that with Bluefield in this space and found the things that were left over sometimes, things that people had forgotten, didn't want anymore, and said, "This we can," like you said, you still make this into something interesting and beautiful. And
you talk about getting away from consumerism.
Yes.
And turning towards creation. We're in a place that embodies that.
And when you're in a 7-story building it's difficult to explain how big it is. But when you're in that much space, and I hear him say almost nothing that is here we paid for, like we got it for free and then turned it into something. It's really phenomenal, and really it works so well with this culture making book. It's neat. So we're in a pretty neat spot. I'm very grateful that he let us use his space for our podcast. So, well, the second section of culture making it's part 2. It's the gospel. And the very first sentence, I'm going to read it real quickly, is this, if you kind of want to know what this section is about, it says it here. At this point, I need to invite you to take what may seem to be a sharp turn from culture in all its manifold and changing forms to one particular cultural good, the Bible. And so really this section is, what does the Bible have to say? If we're people of God's word and ultimately we're people of his book, then we need to look to his book to see what does it mean to be a part of culture making in whatever capacity we can be, and we can talk more about that later. But it starts with the garden and the city. So let's just jump in. I know you said I was going to have to talk more, and I will talk more. But you have marinated in this book in a way that I have not. So talk to us about the garden and the city. What is he talking about, the garden and the city?
Okay, a lot of times we think of Eden as the place of perfection that God created.
Yeah.
But even when he's talking about Eden in Genesis, like we're not even jumping ahead to Revelation yet.
Yeah.
But when he's talking about Eden in Genesis, he talks about a lot of ways that we have to interact with the garden. Like it was created and it was perfect, but there was so much more that could be made out of it.
Yes.
So it was like it could go from good to very good. When humans are able to put their print on what God gave them. So it talks about in Genesis about these certain areas that were rich in gold or rich in silver. But how do you get to gold or silver? You have to mine that area. And so it's not like it's just there and you just kind of pluck it out, but it's talking about mining, which is a type of cultivating, a type of digging into and bringing something different out of. And then if you trace the story from the beginning to the end, and he tells the story of the gospel as kind of a 4-part. You have creation, and then you have the fall, and then you have redemption, and then you have
restoration.
The fullness of the kingdom coming. And so much of Christianity, we focus on the fall and redemption. And it's like we leave out the 2 endpoints. But if we look at the 2 endpoints, it starts and ends in the same place. The tree of life is in the middle of the beginning and of the end. But in the beginning, it was a garden. And in the end, it's a city. And that was always God's plan for us to take what he gave us and for us to make something out of it. So to build a city, man, you talk about all the cultural artifacts that have to be created. You have to learn to pave the streets, and you have to learn to make the bricks, and you have to learn to mine the ore that will become the steel to build the buildings. And all of that was part of God's intention from the very beginning. So he placed us in a garden, not just to be gardeners, but he placed us in a garden packed with resources that we didn't even understand what was around us. But for us to spend, thousands of years figuring out what's around us, naming what's around us, but then figuring out how to use it in new and different ways and to make something beautiful. And then I know you said that the question that he asked, kind of in Revelation, in the book of the Revelation, it talks about in that city some of the things that are going to be there.
Oh yeah, like what will be there? Like
what can
you imagine that will be there? Yeah.
And so he names it as he mentions the ships of Tarshish.
Yeah.
Which Tarshish was this pagan kingdom, which just seems crazy. But they built the most incredible ships in all the world. If you look back through history, they say today, we would have a hard time building ships the way that they built ships in that day. And it was beautiful and it was good. Yeah. And when John has this vision of eternity, of heaven, the new heaven and the new earth, he recognizes there the ships of Tarshish in eternity.
Yeah. Yeah.
How cool is that? So, and then he asks the question, have you ever thought about what's going to make it?
Yes. Yeah.
Have you created anything that's going to make it?
Yeah. And you think about the great music or art or just beautifully crafted, like those ships that will end up and that will be with us. And the fact that it's not just so often we're we'll invest in the eternal, which is great. But then sometimes that keeps us from thinking about what does it mean to make beautiful things too, because some of those beautiful things, according to the Bible, will be in eternity with us. Yeah. And so I really love the idea. I love this trajectory that we see of garden. And then the Bible starts with the garden, it ends with the city. But like you said, the garden is in the center of the city. So you still see that purposeful tree of life there. But the way that he describes the city is that a city is almost by definition a place where culture reaches critical mass. And where, like you said, we have been able to use all these things that he gave us to build things. And one of the things that I keep thinking about as I read this book, this is kind of where I'm going. And it actually, we had a conversation with our whole production team about this, how this house of art, where we are, how it almost kind of makes you want to just relax and take joy in creating. And as we met Gary, he's such a fun person, such a gregarious person. He seems lighthearted, and I know he spends his days creating art. And there was a part of me that thought, oh, I wish I could just kind of relax. And I think that makes me think that that is that piece of us that we were created to be able to just take these resources and be cultivators and then use them in almost this very wonder-filled, delighted, joyful existence. And that's what his intentions were in the garden, you know, and then you kind of, if a city is the place where all of this reaches critical mass, to realize, and I'm getting ahead of ourselves because we're going to talk about this Revelation in a minute, but that where and how we could spend eternity is still exploring and discovering and creating and building and all of this that seems both so purposeful and yet utterly delightful and wonder-filled.
Then if we come back to the theme that we've talked about a couple times of hope words, that in-betweenness.
Yeah.
This creation is, if we see that and we understand that the ships of Tarshish and some of the greatest things are there in eternity, then what we're doing now is a creating for the now.
Yes.
But it's also possibly a creating into eternity, because I mean, you know, the kingdom has come, and we're living as if the kingdom is here.
Right.
And we're creating as if the kingdom is here.
Yeah.
And there's a possibility that it's going to, you know, slip from this realm to the next.
Yeah. And it really does change the way, these thoughts can change the way that you live and create and all of that. So I want us to talk a little bit more about that, get a little bit into this idea of resurrection, and then culminating in his chapter on Revelation and the glorious impossible. But first, we'll just take a quick break for our sponsors, and then we'll be right back.
LifeSprings Resources is committed to providing innovative learning resources for the local church. Our products reflect our commitment to the development of new and innovative ways to experience scriptural truth. Whether you're looking for material for your small group, need new curriculum for Sunday school, or you're just trying to stock up on church supplies, we've got you covered. Look for us online at lifespringsresources.com or call us at 1-800-541-1376, and our friendly customer service team will be happy to assist you. Situated in Bluefield, West Virginia, the Hopewards Writers Conference seeks to equip and encourage their patrons to tell stories of hope. This year's conference will focus on the question of living between cultures and the unique potential it holds for creativity. The conference will offer many exciting guest author speakers this year, and can't wait to learn what God has been speaking into their lives. Come with us and help us tell stories of hope.
Well, we are finishing up part 2 of culture making. We've got one more part to go after this one, but as we conclude this section on it's the gospel, and it really is. He says it's a sharp turn. It is kind of a sharp turn, because we're looking at culture and culture making from Scripture's perspective, essentially. And so during the break, Travis, you were talking about the cross. And we've talked about like the ships of Tarshish and all of these things that might make it, and even like, you know, this great question of, so what might make it? What kind of cultural artifacts might make it into heaven? But there are some that he says won't, and there are some that that are awful and tragic. So why don't you share a little bit about the cross as an example of that?
Yeah, we've been pretty positive in our talk of culture, but fallen humanity has created a lot of terrible cultural artifacts. And he says the cross being one of the biggest, and I just want to read this part of this, page 141. He suffered the full weight of the human story of rebellion against God. He was literally impaled on the worst that culture can do, an instrument of torture that stood for all the other cultural dead ends of history, from spears to bombs, gas chambers to waterboards. Like other instruments of violence, a cross is cultural folly and futility at its most horrible. There is nothing to cultivate about a cross. Nothing good that can be affirmed or tended there, and it is designed to extinguish life itself, ruling out creativity with inexorable gasp of suffocation. Not only does the cross represent an all too literal dead end for its victim, it represents the dead end of culture, the perversion and exhaustion of our calling to make something of the world.
Yeah.
And that's the truth. Like, much of what we make of the world is perversion and exhaustion.
Yeah. And that idea there that when it's intended to extinguish life,
Right.
it's the very opposite of what God has called us to do, to and if you think about in this section and then also in the book we just finished on Pentecost, and even what the Bible says about Christ himself, he's the bringer of life.
Yeah.
And so maybe even that helps us identify what in our culture is should be. We talked about withdrawing from and what is the negative? What is that which we should not try to create from? And you can't. He says you can't. But also just, well, go ahead. You were about to say something.
I was just saying that John mentions that in Revelation, kind of what he mentions here, these instruments of violence don't have a place there, but in a way they do. Because he says the swords are going to be turned into plows. So it's like, in a way, God has a way of redeeming everything.
Yeah.
And so there's not going to be instruments of violence there. But I wonder if we would look at the plows there and recognize that, man, isn't it incredible that at the fullness of this, that all the instruments of torture have been transformed, redeemed, and turned into a tool of cultivation.
Yeah, maybe that's part of what the restoration of all things has to do with. Yeah. Well, as we look at this, speaking of the end, I'd love to, before we finish up, talk about this last section on Revelation. And it's actually not the last chapter, and so there's just so much here. Like, you're just going to have to read
you're not going to get it all from our conversation.
Yes, but I wanted us to look at this whole idea, and it kind of goes back to what I was saying. It's really been inspiring to me about this section, and this whole idea of work and praise on page 172 and 173. At least I think our books are the same, and on page 173, I would love to end with this, and if you want to comment on it, and maybe then we can move on. But kind of in halfway through the page, it says the most plausible answer, it seems to me, and it'll make sense where this is going, is that our eternal life in God's recreated world will be the fulfillment of what God originally asked us to do, cultivating and creating in full and lasting relationship with our Creator. This time, of course, will not just be tending a garden, we'll be sustaining the life of a city, a harmonious human society that has developed all the potentialities hidden in the original creation to their fullest. Culture, redeemed, transformed, and permeated by the presence of God will be the activity of eternity. And I just love this. And it even goes back to this, which we also talked about in Pentecost. It keeps amazing me how these two books flow together. But this whole idea of the now and not yet. But and you mentioned it before, we have started this now, but what we will essentially be doing, like in some ways, our calling doesn't change. And for those of us who've ever thought about, well, heaven's going to be boring or heaven's going to be whatever, that's what, it's like, no, heaven truly is, eternity truly is an extension of the very best parts of what is now.
Yeah.
And that is in some ways this calling to, we've been made in the image of God to create and cultivate from that. And I think we just, I don't know, we see that and that I don't know, I find that really inspiring.
Yeah.
So
N.T. Wright's language is setting the world to right. And it's this idea that all of our work here, anytime we're working towards truth, we're working towards justice, we're working towards beauty, we're setting the world to the way it's going to be in eternity. And he says that we can get frustrated in that type of work because we can't ever quite get there.
Yeah.
But we can comfort ourselves by saying, one day it will.
Yeah. Yeah.
One day it will. So I can work towards the new creation.
Yeah.
In everything that I do, my life should be a working towards and a grasping of the new creation.
Yeah.
And knowing that I can't do it fully because we're in between.
Right.
But I can have a confidence that one day it will.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm going to get to live in that.
That's right. And then the next episode, we're going to get to talk a lot more about what that looks like to do that with God, I guess, is where I'll go with that. We'll talk about that. But we have to end the same way we always end, and that's with this whole idea of just kind of give a personal look into our lives, the books and the cloak. So I always make you go first. I'll share one real quick. So just kind of one of the fun things that's bringing me joy, I would say, like, if you want to bring me something to bring me joy, we've been playing a lot of board games, and my oldest son in particular is a huge fan of board games. And I don't know if you've ever heard of it. There's this game called Machi Koro. It's actually a city building game, so it works really well. You see that? It's a city building game, but I don't know, just sitting around the table as we leave the winter months and move into the spring. It's not, we're not outside a whole lot, but that's been a very life-giving activity for us. And so I would say that's
mine. Because of where we are, I think just being in the mountains is this really cool, comforting thing to me. Driving in the mountains. I love driving in the mountains. The crazy roads, the crazy hills, the curves.
You can have the boggy mountain roads. But
I love it. I love being surrounded by the mountains. That's this has just been like a cloak wrapped around us.
Well, it is beautiful. And if I forget to say it before, I mean, just as someone who gets to attend Hope Words, I appreciate that you share it with us, with the rest of us. So thank you. Well, thank you for being part of this community, for listening in. Wherever you are in terms of reading books or if you're just listening and curious, we are grateful for that too. We have a great time reading these books and discussing them. And so, this is episode 2 for our culture making for Bring Me My Books. Thanks again.